So I've managed to pick up some of the new Fireforge 28mm plastic samurai miniatures. Specifically, I've got these two sprues, which are from the Samurai Warriors box, and there are enough parts on here to make up 6 complete figures. And I just thought I'd take a moment to have a quick look at the sprues with you. For anybody that's not seen them or might be interested in this period, it's not a period of wargaming or military history that I've had a huge amount of experience with, as opposed to interest in, perhaps. I don't have any miniatures from that period already, but they are particularly nice looking. Some excellent examples of them painted up already, so I couldn't help myself but acquire a few, and I've got a few from the other boxes that are available coming as well, so we might have a look at those in a separate video. But I just thought it'd be a chance for some people to see the sprues. One thing you might notice is that there's more sets of legs on the body sprue on this side, there we go, than there are actual torsos. So there are 6 torsos, multiple heads, so you've got lots of options to choose from, but 7 sets of legs, one of which is kneeling. So you can only build 6 figures, but it's giving you the option to have them in slightly different stances, including kneeling. And that is also true of the other sets as well. So if you buy the samurai, they call it samurai shooters, but essentially samurai with missile weapons, so bows and handguns, they also have the additional number of legs. It's this sprue again, I think, but with different weapons, and it gives you the option to having a figure that's kneeling. The Ashigaru sprue is the same as well. I think that might even have 8 sets of legs on it. I might be wrong on that. We'll look at that again later on. And again, it just gives you the options to have more of them kneeling or not in different poses, but still only 6 bodies. So only 6 figures, but more parts than you need to give you more options for customization and making them look individual. So that is the body sprue there. And you can see they've got their katanas and additional swords that can go on their belts. They've got sashimono, they've got the multiple different types of heads, including bear heads. I think I'm probably just going to use all helmets. I tend towards helmets in most periods than bear heads. As I say, 6 torsos, lots of lovely detail on those. Okay, a bit closer, there we go. So you can see, yeah, really nice detail on those. There's some of the different expressions and heads and different helmets. Some of the headgear, some of which are particularly exotic, perhaps more than others. More heads running down this side. Turn that sprue around so it's easy to have a look at those. There you go. Some bear heads as well at the top there. So there you go. So that is one set of bodies essentially that you can build up. But what you're lacking is the arms. So the Samurai Warriors have sprues of these, and then weapon sprues on this side. So you've got the option to have figures, warriors armed with katanas at the top here. You can see in various grips and poses. You'll have to do a little bit of experimenting and fiddling around, I think, to match what is a suitably dynamic pose to the appropriate torso or legs, and make sure it sort of feels like it makes sense and doesn't feel unnatural. And then you've got various different types of pole arms going all the way down. There's a large selection of different weapons, far more weapon arms on here than you necessarily have bodies. So in point of fact, actually what you could do is acquire additional sprues, I think, of the bodies and torsos without acquiring additional weapon sprues, and you'd have plenty of spares to be able to build more figures. And it'd be a way, for example, if you've got a full box of 24, you could maybe buy another sprue of these bodies and torsos and heads and so on, and you could use spare weapons from your main box or your other weapon sprues, so as not to have too many spare parts left over, and it would extend the amount that you can do with a single kit with the parts you've got, make your money go a little bit further, hopefully. So you can see the different pole arms. I think there's naginata on there that you've got ordinary sort of long pole spears. These ones with the sort of the crossblade, the guard, and the hooks and so on. I don't know if those have a specific separate name. I apologise, I'm not an expert. But there are lots of them, as you can see, and they all configure slightly differently. and then more sword arms at the bottom there as well, which I'll probably be using a few of when I put these figures together. So there we go, fairly straightforward, as I say, interchangeable between the boxes. I think in the main boxes you actually get 24 figures in total, so presumably that means you get 4 each of these. In the samurai shooters box, so the ones with missile weapons, it'll be 4 sprues of these presumably, and then 4 sprues of the different missile weapons. And the same is true of the Ashigaru box set. There's a warrior's version and there's a shooter's version, and it'll be the same proportion of sprues. Again, probably enough excess weapons in those, but we'll have a look at those when they arrive separately. In the meantime, I'm going to build a few of these and we'll see how they look once they've been put together. And here are some of the completed figures. As you can see, I've put together all 6 in a variety of different poses. They went together very easily. There aren't a huge amount of different parts that you need to put together. A single figure's consisting of the legs, the torso, the head, the relevant weapon arms, and then the only other fiddly bits you might want to attach are the swords that go on separately to the back, and then if need be the back banner as well, although I haven't put that on all of the different figures. And so your major headache is probably going to be cleaning up the different parts, so scraping off the flash and mould lines which appear down the sides of the figures, so the sides of the heads, arms and so on, because that's the way they're positioned along the sprue. Fortunately, they're not positioned with the head sideways, because then you'd be scraping off the front and back of the face and the head. So all the parts are cleaned up from the side, and there's a slightly fiddly job to do, particularly on some of the more detailed sections where you need to use the point of a craft knife, but it didn't take very long at all, and they all fit together rather well, to be honest. Just don't misplace necessarily which of the supporting arms for the pole weapons, the pole arms, are which, as you might then find yourself going, which one fits more precisely to the wrist of which figure. But yeah, they go together in a lot of very nice dynamic poses. I suppose you might find over time that you were using arms in combinations that were quite similar, because both hands are modelled on the weapons in most cases, so you can't mix and match with all of them. But you can vary which way, for example, they're facing or the angle that they've canted their weapons to give yourself some variety, and they come out rather nicely. So, just show you a close-up of some of the figures. This one. So, for example, this chap could have had his head angled the other way, but I've chosen to just change it, so it just changes the dynamic of the pose, in which way he's weighted his body and which way he's facing. Got quite a nice classic-looking stance for this one. And to give you a different example, this is one of the kneeling bodies. And rather nice they are too. And I can't vouch a huge amount necessarily for the absolute historical accuracy of these, but to my perhaps period untrained eye, they look really good to me. I'm sure they tick the boxes for what many people imagine they'd like their sort of samurai figures or their imaginations of samurai warriors to look like from history. The variety in the armour is given largely by the torso and the helmets. The leg armour appears to be the same on all of the figures. But yeah, they've come out really nicely. I'm very pleased with them. You can see a few more of the other stances and helmets there as well. And for comparison's sake, in terms of scale, because one of the things people ask about, you can see my War of the Roses miniatures in the background there. So these are Perry War of the Roses miniatures. So to give you a sense of scale of these things next to each other, you can see that that one, for example, is quite a bit taller, if only because perhaps the samurai figure is a bit more hunched and doesn't have the tall feather on his helmet. That could explain it in part, because that one is a bit closer to its height and stance. One thing I will say is that not all of the periplastics are the same height either. So that one is much closer, as you can see. The other thing I would say is that, as you can see, the legs and feet of the samurai figures, you clip them straight from the sprue and they're not attached to anything. They don't have an existing plastic plinth underneath their feet, which the Perry figures do. So actually these Perry miniatures figures are naturally slightly taller, not only because of the stance they've been moulded and sculpted in, but because they're stood on a couple of millimetres of extra plastic before being attached to the little wooden sabot base that I've put them on. So that's worth bearing in mind in terms of comparing the absolute height and scale, because in practice actually that might be slightly closer, and then you can see they are slightly close together. But then the samurai figures are perhaps a little more bulky, but that might just be as a consequence of their clothing and armour. But that'll give you some idea at least of some scale comparison between the two. Just in terms of how manufacturers go about scaling them, not that you'd necessarily put these together on a battlefield unless you were doing an interesting what if, I suppose. Anyway, that's a quick look at these figures. Hope you've enjoyed it. I'll have a look at some more Fireforged Samurai and Ashigaru figures in the future, and happy hobbying.